You probably think you know Hercules. The muscle-bound hero. The invincible demigod. Maybe you grew up watching the Disney movie, that guy with the square jaw, the perfect smile, and zero neuroses. Or maybe you remember the TV shows from the 90s, where a tanned Hercules solved weekly problems with bicep curls and a positive attitude. But let me be straight with you, that is not the real story. The true story of Hercules, or rather, Heracles, as the ancient Greeks called him, is deeply disturbing. It is a narrative of madness. Of infanticide. Of a man destroyed by guilt, forced to perform impossible tasks not to become a hero, but to atone for the murder of his own family. There is no simple happy ending here. What we have is Greek tragedy in its purest sense, a man born to suffer, used as a pawn in a game of vengeful gods, who, despite everything, finds a brutal form of redemption. Before we begin, we need to clarify something crucial. Heracles is the original Greek name. It means, glory of Hera, a deeply ironic name, as you will see. Hercules is the Roman, Latinized adaptation. The Romans took this Greek hero and molded him in their own image, more glorious, less complicated, more palatable. We are going to focus on the Greek Heracles. The original. The man of flesh, bone, and tragedy. Brace yourselves. This is a story for adults. And it begins, like so many Greek tragedies, with betrayal, lust, and the relentless fury of a goddess. The story of Heracles begins with Zeus, the king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, and, frankly speaking, a serial adulterer. Zeus had a problem: he couldn't keep his hands off mortal women. And one of those women was Alcmene, princess of Mycenae, wife of the general Amphitryon. Alcmene was known for her virtue. She was faithful. Untouchable. Which, obviously, made her even more irresistible to Zeus. Zeus, being Zeus, wouldn't take no for an answer. So he did what any morally questionable Olympic god would do: he assumed the form of Alcmene's husband. While the real Amphitryon was away in battle, Zeus entered the marital chamber disguised as the general and spent the night with Alcmene. To make things more efficient, Zeus ordered Helios, the sun god, not to rise for 3 days. He literally extended the night to maximize his time with his unsuspecting victim. And Hera? Zeus's lawful wife? She found out. Of course she found out. Hera wasn't just annoyed. She went apocalyptic. But here is the crucial detail about Greek mythology: Hera could never punish Zeus directly. The Olympian patriarchy didn't work that way. So she did what she always did: she punished the victim. Alcmene became pregnant. And when the time came for the birth, Hera acted. Zeus, in his divine arrogance, had declared that the next descendant of the house of Perseus born on that day would rule Greece. He was talking about Heracles, of course. But Hera, goddess of childbirth and marriage, manipulated time. She delayed Heracles' birth and accelerated the birth of Eurystheus, a weak and sickly cousin. Eurystheus was born first. And so, by a divine trick, he was the one who became king. Heracles. Heracles was born to serve. But Hera didn't stop there. When Heracles was still a baby, probably only 8 months old, she sent 2 giant serpents to strangle him in his crib. Most children would have died. Heracles. He grabbed the serpents with his tiny hands and strangled them to death. Amphitryon found the baby in the morning, playing with the twisted corpses of the snakes. It was in that moment he knew, this was no ordinary son. This child was extraordinary. And doomed. Because Hera would never stop. She would haunt him for the rest of his mortal life, making his existence an unending hell. The name Heracles, glory of Hera, was, therefore, a cruel cosmic joke. His entire life would be dedicated, involuntarily, to demonstrating the vengeful power of the goddess who hated him. Heracles grew up. He was trained by the best. Autolycus taught him to wrestle, Eumolpus taught him music, Linus tried to teach him civility. It didn't work. During a lesson, Heracles, already demonstrating the violent temper that would define him, killed Linus with a lyre. He became strong. Absurdly strong. But strength without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. And that destruction was right around the corner. For a time, just a brief moment in Heracles' life, things were good. He married Megara, daughter of King Creon of Thebes. They had children. Sources vary on the number. Apollodorus lists 3, while other sources speak of up to 7 children. It doesn't matter how many there were. What matters is that Heracles loved them. He was a father. He had a family. A life. And then Hera decided he had too much happiness. Heracles had just returned from one of his adventures. Some say it was his last and hardest mission for Eurystheus, capturing Cerberus, the 3-headed dog of the underworld. He was exhausted. Mentally and physically drained. And that was exactly when Hera struck. She sent Iris, the divine messenger, and with her, Lyssa, the demonic personification of rabid madness. Euripides, in his tragedy Heracles, captures this moment with devastating psychological precision. Lyssa, madness herself, hesitates. She sees the injustice of what she is about to do. She argues with Iris. Why must I destroy this man? He cleansed the world of monsters. He is a hero. But Iris, acting on Hera's orders, insists. And Lyssa obeys. What happens next is one of the most disturbing scenes in Greek literature. Heracles was about to perform a purifying sacrifice in his home, with his children around him. And then, the madness took him. His eyes rolled back. His pupils dilated and turned blood red. Foam dripped from his beard. He began to laugh, a madman's laugh. And then he stopped recognizing where he was. In his delirious mind, Heracles believed he was in Mycenae, the city of Eurystheus, his tormentor. He saw his children, and thought they were Eurystheus' children. He picked up his bow. The same hands that had strangled serpents as a baby. The same hands that had defeated lions and hydras. And he shot. One by one, he killed his own children. Some accounts say he threw them into the fire. Others say he shot them with arrows, thinking they were enemies. Megara tried to protect them. She placed herself between Heracles and the children, begging him to wake up, to recognize his family. He killed her too. When the madness finally passed, when Athena intervened and put him to sleep, Heracles woke up and saw his children dead by his own hands. His wife dead. And he remembered nothing. This is the core of Heracles' tragedy. It's not about strength. It's not about monsters. It's about a man who, through no fault of his own, destroyed everything he loved. Imagine waking up with blood on your hands and corpses at your feet, with no memory of how they got there. Imagine the guilt. The shame. The existential horror. Heracles wanted to kill himself. He took up a sword, ready to end it all. But then came Theseus, his friend, whom he had saved from the underworld. Theseus convinced him that suicide was cowardice. That he needed to live with what he had done. that he needed to find atonement. So Heracles went to the oracle of Delphi. And the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, gave him his sentence: he must serve Eurystheus, the man who hated him, for 12 years. He must perform whatever task Eurystheus demanded, no matter how impossible. Only then could he purify himself. Only then could he have peace. And so began the 12 labors of Heracles. Not as glorious adventures, but as penance. As self-punishment. As a broken man's desperate attempt to find redemption through suffering. Eurystheus was terrified. When Heracles presented himself to him, wearing the skin of the Nemean lion as armor, we'll get there, the king literally hid in a bronze jar buried in the ground. This was the man who was supposed to give orders to Heracles. A coward hiding in pots. But Eurystheus was clever. He knew he couldn't beat Heracles with strength. So he would try to kill him through impossible tasks. Labor 1, the Nemean lion. The first labor seemed simple: kill the lion that is terrorizing the region of Nemea. But this was no ordinary lion. Depending on the source, it was the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, the parents of the most horrific monsters in Greek mythology, or it had fallen from the moon. What matters is that its skin was impenetrable. Arrows ricocheted. Swords shattered. Spears bent. Heracles tried every weapon he knew. Nothing worked. Then he realized, if weapons don't work, use your hands. The lion had a cave with 2 entrances. Heracles blocked one, forcing the lion to retreat through the other. He cornered it. And then, in absolute darkness, man and beast faced off. Heracles grabbed it by the neck. The lion roared, fought, tried to scratch him with claws the size of daggers. But Heracles, driven not by glory but by despair, squeezed. And squeezed. And squeezed. Until the roaring stopped. Until the lion, the invincible Nemean lion, suffocated. But then came another problem: how do you skin an animal whose hide is blade-proof? Athena, watching from afar, suggested, use the lion's own claws. And so Heracles did. He used the beast's claws to cut its own skin, creating armor that would make him nearly invulnerable for the rest of his life. When he returned to Mycenae carrying the lion's corpse on his shoulders, Eurystheus was so terrified he decreed, Heracles must never enter the city again. From now on, he would deliver his proof outside the gates. Labor 2, the Lernaean Hydra. If the Nemean lion was brutal, the Lernaean Hydra was an existential nightmare. Imagine a serpent with 6, 7, maybe 9 heads, sources vary. Each head possesses venomous fangs. Its breath is toxic. Its blood is pure hydra venom, one of the most lethal compounds in Greek mythology. And here is the truly diabolical part: every time you cut off one head, 2 grow in its place. It is the mythological equivalent of fighting exponential growth. It is mathematically impossible. Heracles arrived at the swamp of Lerna with his nephew Iolaus. He began to hack away. But for every head that fell, 2 new ones sprouted, hissing and spitting poison. And then Iolaus had an idea: fire. Every time Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus immediately cauterized the stump with a burning torch. The flesh burned, sealed, preventing regrowth. It worked. But there was a problem: one of the heads was immortal. It couldn't be killed. It couldn't be burned. So Heracles cut it off and buried it alive under a giant rock, where it supposedly remains to this day, eternally alive, eternally imprisoned. And then he did something brilliant and terrible: He dipped all his arrows in the Hydra's blood. From now on, any creature, mortal or immortal, struck by these arrows would die in agony. The poison was incurable. Keep this information in mind. It will return in a tragic way later. When Heracles returned to Eurystheus, the king refused to count this labor. Why? Because Iolaus had helped. Eurystheus declared this was cheating. That was how 10 labors became 12. Labor 3, the Ceryneian hind. Not all labors involved direct violence. Some were tests of patience. The Ceryneian hind was an animal sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. It had golden antlers and bronze hooves. And it was faster than an arrow. Eurystheus ordered Heracles to capture it alive, without shedding a drop of blood. If he hurt it, Artemis would kill him. If he killed it, Artemis would kill him. If he failed, Eurystheus would call him a coward. So Heracles did something no one expected, he chased it. For a whole year. Non-stop. No rest. Through Greece, through Thrace, through Istria, to the mythical lands of the Hyperboreans in the extreme north. Finally, exhausted, the animal stopped to drink water. Heracles fired a non-lethal arrow that pinned the hind's legs together without wounding it. He picked it up and began the journey back. On the way, he met Artemis. The goddess was furious. "You dare touch my sacred animal?" Heracles, with humility, a rarity for him, explained, "I had no choice. I am seeking atonement for the greatest crime a man can commit. I did not hurt your hind. I merely borrowed it." Artemis, recognizing the sincerity, allowed him to continue, but only if he returned the hind unharmed. Heracles agreed. He delivered the animal to Eurystheus and, the moment the king reached for it, Heracles let go. The hind ran back to Artemis. Labor complete. Technically. Labor 4, the Erymanthian boar. Back to brutality. The Erymanthian boar was a colossal beast devastating the region. Eurystheus wanted Heracles to bring it back alive. Heracles chased it up the mountain, into deep snow. When the boar became exhausted and sank into the snow, Heracles bound it in chains and carried it on his shoulders, alive, growling, and thrashing, back to Mycenae. When Eurystheus saw Heracles arriving with a giant boar on his shoulders, he jumped back into his bronze jar. Labor complete. But, on this journey, something important happened. Heracles stopped at Mount Pholo to visit the friendly centaur Pholus. Pholus welcomed him with hospitality and opened a jar of wine, sacred wine that belonged to all centaurs. The smell of the wine attracted the other centaurs, who went into a frenzy. A battle began. Heracles, defending himself, killed several centaurs with his poisoned hydra arrows. Among the dead was Chiron, the wisest and gentlest of all centaurs, immortal, teacher of heroes. Heracles struck him accidentally. The hydra's poison began to work. Chiron, being immortal, could not die, but he suffered eternal agony. Eventually, Chiron begged to trade his immortality for release. He promised to give it to Prometheus in exchange for finally being able to die and escape the pain. Once again, Heracles had killed an innocent. Once again, his hands were stained with blood he did not intend to spill. The guilt never left him. The first labors tested Heracles' strength and endurance. The next ones would test his soul. Labor 5, the Augean stables. Eurystheus decided to humiliate Heracles. Not with glory, but with shit. Literally. King Augeas owned the largest herds in the world, thousands of divine, immortal cattle that never stopped producing manure. For 30 years, no one had cleaned the stables. Eurystheus ordered Heracles to clean it all. In a single day. The message was clear: you are not a hero. You are a servant. A slave. And I will treat you as such. But Heracles wasn't just muscles. He thought. He diverted 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, making them flow directly through the stables. The torrent of water swept away decades of filth in a matter of hours. Labor complete. But Eurystheus again refused to count this labor. Why? Because Heracles had negotiated payment with Augeas, 1/10 of the cattle. Eurystheus declared that paid work did not count as penance. 10 labors were now 11. Labor 6, the Stymphalian birds. At Lake Stymphalia, carnivorous birds infested the region. They were no ordinary birds, their feathers were sharp bronze, which they shot like arrows. Their beaks could pierce armor. Their excrement was poisonous. Athena, who was starting to pity Heracles, gave him a gift, magical castanets forged by Hephaestus. The sound was so loud, so deafening, that the birds fled in panic. As they flew, Heracles shot them down with his poisoned arrows. Those that survived fled forever, supposedly reaching the island of Ares in the Black Sea, where Jason and the Argonauts would later encounter them. Labor 7, the Cretan bull. Now the story connects with another famous Greek myth, the Minotaur. King Minos of Crete had received a magnificent bull from Poseidon, with the promise to sacrifice it to the god. But the bull was so beautiful that Minos decided to keep it and sacrifice another in its place. Poseidon, furious, drove the bull mad, and also made Minos's wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the animal. Yes, Greek mythology has no limits. From this bizarre union, the Minotaur would be born. But that is another story. Heracles was sent to capture the maddened bull. He dominated it with brute force, mounted it, and rode it across the Aegean Sea back to mainland Greece. Eurystheus, seeing the bull, was terrified, as always, and released it. The animal wandered to Marathon, where it would eventually be killed by Theseus years later. Labor 8, the Mares of Diomedes. This labor is particularly dark. Diomedes, king of Thrace, owned 4 mares, Podargos, Lampon, Xanthos, and Deimos. He fed them human flesh, usually unsuspecting travelers who had the misfortune of visiting his kingdom. Eurystheus wanted Heracles to bring them back alive. Heracles arrived with a group of companions, including his beloved Abderus. They overpowered the mares and began their escape. But Diomedes and his army pursued them. During the battle, Heracles left the mares in the care of Abderus, the young man he loved. Greek sources are explicit about this. Heracles had relationships with both men and women, something perfectly normal in ancient Greece. The mares, hungry, devoured Abderus alive. When Heracles returned and found only bones, he went into a rage. He killed Diomedes personally and fed the king's body to his own mares. Curiously, after eating their cruel master, the mares calmed down. They became docile. Heracles took them to Eurystheus and then set them free. It is said they wandered to Mount Olympus, where they were devoured by lions. Heracles founded the city of Abdera in memory of his dead lover. More blood. More loss. More guilt. Labor 9, the belt of Hippolyta. Admete, Eurystheus' daughter, desired the magical belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a race of warrior women who lived without men and were daughters of Ares. Initially, everything was peaceful. Hippolyta was impressed by Heracles. she agreed to give the belt voluntarily. But Hera, never missing an opportunity to cause suffering, spread a rumor among the Amazons that Heracles was there to kidnap their queen. The Amazons attacked. Heracles, thinking he had been betrayed, went into combat mode. In the confusion, Hippolyta was killed, some versions say by Heracles, others say by her own warriors in the chaos. Heracles took the belt from her body and left, leaving more dead in his wake. The irony, he could have completed this labor without violence. But Hera ensured blood was spilled. Labor 10, the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies fused from the waist up, 3 torsos, 3 heads, 6 arms. He owned a herd of blood, red cattle guarded by Orthrus, a 2-headed dog, brother of Cerberus, and the herdsman Eurytion. To get there, Heracles traveled to the end of the known world, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules. On the way, the heat of the sun annoyed him so much that he shot arrows at the sun itself. Helios, the sun god, was so impressed by the audacity that he lent Heracles his golden cup, the magical boat he used to travel back to the east every night. Heracles killed Orthrus with his club. He killed Eurytion. And then he faced Geryon, firing a poisoned arrow that pierced all 3 bodies at once. He stole the cattle and began the long journey back, crossing all of Europe, facing thieves, monsters, and even giants along the way. When he finally arrived, it had taken years to complete this single labor. Labor 11, the apples of the Hesperides. This is, perhaps, the most philosophical labor of all. The golden apples of the Hesperides were fruits of immortality, guarded by the nymphs Hesperides in the garden of the gods at the extreme west of the world. 100-headed dragon named Ladon never slept, guarding the tree eternally. No one knew the exact location of the garden. Heracles first had to find Nereus, the old man of the sea, who could shape-shift. He captured him and forced him to reveal the location. Finally, he reached the garden, and found Atlas. Atlas, the Titan condemned by Zeus to hold the sky on his shoulders forever as punishment for fighting in the Titanomachy. Heracles made a proposal, "Let me hold the sky for you. You get the apples, since you are the father of the Hesperides and can enter the garden without fighting. Then we switch back." Atlas, desperate for any relief after millennia of torment, agreed. And Heracles assumed the weight of the sky. Imagine it. The weight of the entire celestial vault. Every star. Every planet. The entire structure of the universe pressing down on his shoulders. Atlas went to get the apples and returned. But then he said, "You know, I think I'll deliver these apples to Eurystheus personally. You can stay there holding the sky." Heracles could have attacked him. But he couldn't drop the sky, the whole world would collapse. So he used his wits. "All right, Atlas. But let me just adjust my cloak on my shoulders first. Can you hold it for just a moment?" Atlas, dumb as a rock, literally, agreed and took the sky back. Heracles grabbed the apples and left. He delivered the apples to Eurystheus, who was terrified, they were too sacred for a mortal to possess. Athena took them back to the garden. The symbolism here is profound. Heracles had literally carried the weight of the world. He knew the cosmic burden. And this was part of his atonement, understanding that his suffering, though immense, was only a small part of universal suffering. Labor 12, Cerberus, the descent to Hades. And finally, the last labor. The most impossible of all. Eurystheus ordered, "Go to the underworld. Capture Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guards the gates of Hades. Bring him to me alive. And then return him." It was a death sentence. No one returns from Hades alive. But Heracles had nothing to lose. He had killed his family. Spent years in slave labor. His entire life was suffering. Death didn't scare him. He was already living in hell. He descended through the entrance at Taenarum, in southern Greece. As he went down, the air grew colder. The light faded. And he entered the realm of the dead. Charon, the ferryman of the dead, initially refused to transport him. He was alive. But Heracles stared at him with such intensity that Charon yielded. Upon entering Hades, the souls of the dead fled from him in terror, except Medusa, already killed by Perseus, and Meleager. Heracles spoke with the soul of Meleager, who told him about his sister Deianira. Remember that name. Deianira. She will be important. Finally, he reached the thrones of Hades and Persephone, king and queen of the underworld. Heracles knelt. Explained his mission. And asked for permission. Hades, impressed by his courage, agreed on one condition: you can take Cerberus, but only if you master him without weapons. Only your hands. Cerberus wasn't just a big dog. He had 3 heads that bit independently, a tail that was a living serpent, and snakes growing from his back. Heracles grabbed him by the central neck. The other heads bit his flesh. The snake tail stung him. But he didn't let go. He squeezed. And squeezed. Until Cerberus, gasping, submitted. He carried him across the Styx, through the caves, back to the world of the living. When he emerged into the sunlight with Cerberus growling on his back, flowers withered. Plants died. Daylight itself seemed to dim. He dragged the beast to Mycenae. Eurystheus, upon seeing it, fainted from terror. Take him back. Take him back. And Heracles obeyed. He returned Cerberus to the underworld, where the dog resumed his eternal guard. 12 labors. Completed. But the story doesn't end here. Because Heracles learned something in Hades, there is no escape from suffering. Not even in death. After the 12 labors, Heracles was free. Technically. But men like Heracles never find peace. His life continued. He participated in the expedition of the Argonauts, fought in wars, killed more monsters. And eventually, he married again. Her name was Deianira, man, destroyer, the same one Meleager's soul had mentioned in Hades. Heracles won her by defeating the river god Achilles in hand-to-hand combat. They married. Had children. For a while, there was peace. But then, during a journey, they reached the river Ivenus. A centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira on his back while Heracles swam. Heracles accepted. Fatal mistake. In the middle of the river, Nessus tried to rape Deianira. Heracles, from the other side, heard her screams. Grabbed his bow. Aimed. And fired an arrow poisoned with Hydra's blood, that incurable venom, straight into Nessus's heart. Nessus, dying, saw his chance for revenge. He whispered to Deianira. Take my blood. If you ever suspect Heracles is loving another woman, rub this blood on his clothes. It will work as a love potion. He will never look at another. Deianira, naive, collected the blood in a vial and hid it. But that blood wasn't a love potion. It was Nessus's blood mixed with the Hydra's poison that was still on the arrow. It was pure poison. Death in liquid form. And Nessus knew it. Years later, Heracles captured a city and brought home a young princess named Iole as a concubine. Deianira, feeling threatened, remembered Nessus's gift. She took a new tunic and soaked it in the oil of love, and sent it to Heracles. Heracles put it on. He began to perform a sacrifice to the gods, giving thanks for his victory. And then the heat of the sacrifice activated the poison. The tunic began to burn his flesh. The Hydra's poison, that same incurable venom he had used to kill so many enemies, was now devouring his own body. He tried to rip the tunic off, but it had fused to his skin. Every piece he tore away took muscle and flesh with it. The pain was unimaginable. Literally unimaginable. This was the same poison that had made Chiron, the immortal centaur, beg for death. When Deianira discovered what she had done, that Nessus had tricked her, that she had murdered her own husband, she hanged herself. More tragedy. More blood on Heracles' hands, even indirectly. Heracles, blind with pain, ordered to be taken to Mount Ida. He ordered his sons to build a massive funeral pyre. And then he climbed onto it. He lay on the wood, using the Nemean lion's skin as a pillow, his club by his side. And ordered the fire to be lit. No one wanted to do it. No one wanted to kill Greece's greatest hero. Finally, a shepherd named Philoctetes, who would later be important in the Trojan War, agreed. In exchange, Heracles gave him his bow and poisoned arrows. The fire was lit. The flames consumed his mortal body, the flesh that had suffered so much, the hands that had killed monsters and family, the heart that had carried so much guilt. And then Zeus intervened. A cloud descended. Thunder rumbled. And the immortal essence of Heracles, the divine part inherited from Zeus, ascended. He was taken to Olympus. He became a god. Hera, finally, made peace with him. She gave him her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth, in marriage. Heracles, the man who had suffered more than any mortal, achieved apotheosis, elevation to divinity. But let's be honest, was that really a happy ending? So, what do we do with Heracles? How do we interpret a hero who murdered his family, who lived a life of violence, who died in agony, but who became a god? Here is what I think the ancient Greeks understood, and what we often forget. Heracles is not a model of perfection. He is a model of endurance. He is not the hero because he was strong. He is the hero because he kept going, even when the whole world conspired against him. The Stoic philosophers, especially in the Roman period, loved Heracles. For them, he represented the core idea of Stoicism: you cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. Heracles didn't choose to be born Zeus's bastard son. He didn't choose Hera's fury. He didn't choose the madness that made him kill his children. But he chose not to give up. He chose to seek redemption, even knowing it might be impossible. Each labor was a metaphor. The Nemean lion, facing what seems invincible, the Hydra, problems that multiply the more you fight them, the Ceryneian hind, patience and persistence, Cerberus, facing your deepest fears, literally descending into your own personal hell. And that moment with Atlas, literally holding the weight of the sky. That is what life sometimes feels like. An impossible weight that is going to crush you. And the temptation to pass it on to someone else. But Heracles didn't do that. He carried it. And then found a clever solution. The inconvenient truth about Heracles is this: he never became a better man. Even after the 12 labors, he remained violent. He killed kings. He sacked cities. He had fits of rage. His apotheosis was not a reward for becoming morally perfect. It was recognition that he had endured. He had carried his burden to the end. He didn't quit, even when it would have been easier to die. And that is why the Disney version, while charming, completely misses the point. Heracles is not a story about becoming strong enough to win. It is a story about continuing when you have already lost everything. In the modern world, we understand trauma better than ever. PTSD. Survivor's guilt. The struggle of living after making irreparable mistakes, even unintentional ones. Heracles is, perhaps, the first literary portrait of PTSD in Western history. A man destroyed by violence he didn't control, forced to live with the consequences, desperately seeking some form of redemption that might never come. So, what is Heracles' legacy? It's not about muscles. It's not about killing monsters. It is about this: suffering is not the end of your story. What you do after it is. Heracles killed his family in a madness he didn't ask for. He could have killed himself. Many would have. But he chose to live. He chose to work. He chose to suffer with a purpose. And in the end, whether you are religious, spiritual, or completely secular, there is something powerful in the idea that this suffering, this endurance, was eventually recognized. Rewarded. Immortalized. The Greeks put Heracles in the stars. Literally, the constellation Hercules is still there, visible in the northern hemisphere every spring. They wanted us to look up and remember. Even heroes suffer. Even gods are born of pain. But the story doesn't end in tragedy. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you in any way, if you are carrying your own impossible weight, remember. You don't need to be a demigod to be a hero. You just need to keep going. One day at a time. One labor at a time. Like Heracles did. If you enjoyed the story, comment below on which point you found most interesting for us to debate. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories.